What's good, everybody in Chicago? Kahlief here. You know, I've been extremely excited about everything Deathloop. It has been one of my most anticipated games of the year, a PS5 exclusive, dope stuff coming from Arkane Lyon, coming from Bethesda, all the good stuff that's in that conversation. If you got a chance to see our preview, or if you haven't, go check that out. If you have seen it, then you know exactly what we are about to get into with our review today. Again, lots of good stuff to dig into. We're going to dig into the good, bad, and ugly of all of it. And here we go with our Deathloop review. Deathloop is a really fantastic game. You find yourself stranded on this island of Black Reef. When you come to, you are this character that is named Cole. You have no idea what you're doing on the island. You have been shipwrecked on this place. You have no idea what's happening, but you have these visions of all these cool things that are coming up around you, and they're giving you information, but you really don't know what to do with it. And that kind of lays as the foundation for where you start in this game from a narrative perspective. It is a really interesting way to kind of tell a story in a game that is revolving around a time loop. Where it seems to be the year of time loops in 2021, but this one does a really interesting job of not only kind of bridging the gaps between how you pull in information, because it has a lot of puzzle pieces to it, but it also gives you this really cool game mechanic in which you have to continuously go through the day in different sections and complete different tasks that include killing 7 different individuals during a day so that you can finally get out of this full loop that you find yourself in. Besides the narrative bits of Deathloop, the main other kind of character within this game is Black Reef itself. It is a gorgeously laid out bunch of different kinds of maps that encompass this entire island, where you find yourself kind of digging into this menagerie of murder, if you want to call it that. It's just this place where you can figure out and dig into small little crevices and find out all these really cool spots to kind of, figure out how you want to tackle these situations and make sure you're finding out how to assassinate these folks in the kind of most reasonable and lethal way possible. It really does wind up kind of showcasing and showing off just how good the gameplay aspects of Deathloop are. It really does nail all the small intricacies of a stealth game, really tight first-person gunplay, really cool scripted moments, but also a lot of stuff that just isn't, like things that are kind of all over the place all the time. Like you're finding things in the way that, if you've played a Metal Gear Solid game, you're finding people pathing in certain places to be able to kind of remember those patterns and use that to your advantage, then you're going to be a fantastic Deathloop player. It is something that is going to just be easy for you to definitely pull yourself into and find yourself kind of digging around into. But the spaces themselves have this really funky, dope, eclectic feel where you're going from kind of desolate beaches to, these really elaborate homes and all these kind of small spaces that have so many places to play. It is really it's a really cool kind of like setting to be able to have this in, that also has this really dope 60s kind of eclectic vibe too, which I think also brings another layer to this, not only thematically, but musically and from the art direction and everything else. It really is a shining part of what Deathloop brings to the table as a game in this place from a studio like Arkane Lyon. Super, super cool stuff. Alongside the really cool elements that you have with the setting and gunplay, there are these kind of mystic elements to it too that come in the form of trinkets and slabs, which wind up being your powers that you have throughout the game. So you have different ones where you'll be able to go invisible for a little bit. You'll be able to teleport. You'll be able to do this really cool power where you're able to kind of connect people's minds. And then if you act on one, everyone who has been connected is still affected by that particular gunshot. Or if you stab somebody, they all will wind up dying all at the same time. It is a really cool premise to be able to get those elements into it, because it not only adds to the gameplay, but it also gives you so many different ways to tackle a situation within a moment-to-moment battle. So I've had moments where I've gone in really stealthily, kind of snuck around, gone invisible, pop a couple of people here and there and watch them all die, maybe throw some people off a cliff with telekinesis. all these cool things while also being able to hack devices and hack other parts of the world to also work towards my favor. It is a really like fun playground to dig into and to move around in. It's not only something where you feel like you can control all the elements at the same time, but it also just makes the game fun because you're constantly going back in to each one of these maps, doing different things at different times of day. And things change between times of day. People will be there in some spots and sometimes not in others. People will change paths in the way that they work. Some parts of the map will just be fully closed. You have to try to figure out ways to open those things up. So the time elements of Deathloop, besides the loop itself, really do change the way that you want to tackle a situation and tackle a game from each day and each part of each day, moving into the map in different kind of ways. It is a cool premise to be able to kind of do it that way. It also adds a little bit of monotony to it. I will say that as well. Like you wind up getting into a certain cadence where you wind up getting faster, but it also doesn't feel as good because the things aren't changing enough to really give you that variety that you would have hoped for. Because I'll be honest, the AI isn't as smart as I would have hoped for in this kind of game. I was kind of disappointed in the way that a lot of the enemies aren't that smart. They will walk into the same kinds of traps that you wind up seeing. It does have that really weird and not great thing where you alert one person and you're just like everybody in the map is trying to kill you at that point, which is not great in terms of having a stealth game like this. Because I'm just like, how did you hear me all the way over there in the mountain when I'm all the way over here in the city? But you're also trying to kill me now because there was a random thing that happened in this small area in a place that I was trying to fight. So it does have some quirks in terms of the gameplay that I think are okay, but they don't really feel that great in the way that mechanic needs to work in a game like this. One of the other parts that I do think is actually pretty cool is that every run has a small kind of roguelike element to it, so that you have this power residuum that you wind up pulling out of the world. You kind of suck those things out of different kinds of elements that you wind up seeing. You wind up getting them from certain kills of certain visionaries, and you wind up getting them throughout the world. And what happens is in between your time frames of when you leave a section of the map, you wind up getting a chance to basically save some of the elements, some of the trinkets, some of the slab that you might get, some of the weapons you may find that have different permutations as well, so that you can use them on the next run that you wind up going on. So it winds up changing out, again, the way that you think about playing the game, the way you wind up pulling in different pieces of gear. And then you find out like, oh, I really like that pistol, or I really like that sniper rifle. And oh, it really has this good perk on it. So I'm going to use that for this particular map that may either have like a bunch of sight lines for you to snipe on, or it might be really tight quarters. So you may want to use a shotgun, or you might want to find one that has, a silencer on it. So it's a lot quieter. So when you're sneaking through places, you actually have more spaces to kind of use it. So the game does a really good job of not only kind of keeping you on your toes with the elements and the enemies that it has in it, but it also does a really good job of giving you more variety in the routes that you run and every consecutive run that you wind up going in. So that is a really cool thing about the game so far that I've liked. I think that was a pretty brilliant way that it works. A thing that doesn't work so well, to be fair, are the boss battles. I think the visionaries may be one of the weakest parts of the game, which was super disappointing because from the idea of what these characters are, they all have these varying kinds of powers. You really don't get a good idea of who they are until you kind of maneuver through the game and you learn more about each individual visionary and what they do, why they're there, what kind of position do they play within the group of these kind of, these party animals kind of like who are in this kind of like experiment that is all about, kind of living life to the fullest and them not wanting to leave this kind of thing because you're pretty much immortal in this particular space. It's a super cool premise, but it doesn't really translate to not only the way that you are interacting with these characters throughout the game, but also they're not really fun to fight. You would expect them to have all these really cool powers and maneuvers and for them to kind of use them on you in a way that feels good. And maybe this is a thing that winds up getting changed within a patch, or there's some tuning that happens within the game. But I found that most of the boss fights, most of the visionary fights, were pretty boring. They were not that fun to play in and to play through. And it wasn't because of anything that was very specific. It was just my expectations for what those fights were going to be just didn't really pan out to what they wind up being while I wind up playing through them. There's a section of the game, or a part of the mechanics, where Juliana will magically appear. She will basically hunt you down. Throughout the game, and what you have to do is you have to find this radio tower and hack it, because it will shut down, and then your usual route to leave the area is closed off until you are able to either kill her and then hack that station, or you just have to kind of like get through that battle, right? It's an interesting premise. It's cool, especially because the AI is doing it, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means a little bit later. But I think even those fights aren't that fun. Like they're not that interesting. I was able to figure out pretty early, like, use a certain kind of weapon against Juliana, and you'll basically knock her on the ground, and you can keep shooting her while she's on the ground, and she'll probably die faster than she can kill you. I had a couple of fights where she got the better of me, but that was less because she was a really competent fighter, and that was more because I got stuck on either some geometry, I went into it with lower health, or I wasn't really paying attention to the fight in the way that I should have. It's a little bit disappointing. I will not lie and say that that's not the case, to see that the kind of main thrust behind what you're doing in this game from a gameplay perspective is probably the weakest part of the game so far in Deathloop. I'm hoping that maybe they can figure out a way to fine tune that, but I don't know how you make that part better without fundamentally changing the way that those things are kind of handled. Maybe they can bump up something that's like use your powers more, or path differently, or any of that kind of stuff. So there's some of those elements that I think could be better within it. I think pathing for them was not as good as it was for some of the other kind of low level characters. You just see the kind of cannon fodder that's in the game. But also, like, I think for the game itself, those are the main targets that you have to go through. I think the thing that is actually more interesting and more fun is the lead up to how you wind up getting those folks out of the loop itself. So I think, I'm not going to share any of that stuff because that's like fundamental to how the game plays, and I wouldn't want to spoil that for you. But I think when I think about what the loop of the game is, and once I understood what I was supposed to do, because I had a bit of confusion, actually, because I was playing the game a little bit wrong for a while of it, because I just didn't understand what I was supposed to be doing during the process of either eliminating some of these foes, or trying to figure out how to get new weapons, or trying to actually move the story forward. So it was a little bit confusing. I think some of that is based on the UI. I think some of the elements in the UI are not great in the way that it works. It does this really funky thing where, you're kind of looking at the kind of to-do list for yourself, and it zooms in really close. I can't show it because it'll give away elements of the story, but it's something that's not really done super well. It was kind of annoying to see how the way that they tackled the UI parts of that part of the game. But once you do understand it and it clicks, then it gets really interesting, because then the puzzle aspect of all of the interconnectedness between the visionaries, between you and Juliana, between you and the island, between you and the conversation around what the project is, all of that starts to click. And when it does, then it feels great. It feels cool to be able to like, oh, that thing that I saw over in this part of the map, I need to go back to that thing because that will let me get to the next layer of what the story may be. I think the world building is dope. Like the way they have little mini Easter eggs. There are cool little patterns and projects and puzzles that you can interact with to get better loot, to get better stuff, to see different parts of the story, to open up different parts of the island. Like the way they do the world building through notes and audio and all that kind of stuff is really cool. Like that might be my favorite part of the game, but sadly the part that you have to engage with the most when it comes to the visionaries and their fights just aren't that good. So, what do I feel about the entire package of Deathloop? I think, again, as a person who is mega excited about this game and had the chance to play this thing really early. Again, shout out to our friends over at Bethesda, our friends over at Sony and PlayStation for getting us the copies early. I played through this game. Probably my runtime was about 20 hours to finish. I probably would have cut down a couple of hours if I'd really been, locked in on the process of getting through the actual like full, to-do list to how to get to the kind of end game of what you wind up seeing. But I had a really good time with it. I think, there are parts of it that feel a little bit harsh from my review today about like the boss battles and stuff like that. But I think the gun battles that you go into are fun. They feel interesting. The kind of, way that you're able to use the world against enemies and use your powers and figure out ways to connect all those things together. You really do feel like you're a puppet master kind of moving the pieces around on the board in a fun and interesting way. I just wish that, the character of Cole was a little bit better. He's kind of stupid. He's not that smart. He has really good VO and has really good, interesting lines. I think the lines that they've given him are really good. Like the person who's doing the VO for Cole and Juliana, actually for Cole, is really good. The VO for Juliana is good, but the lines aren't that good. She winds up feeling really, really annoying. Like she's like kind of just poking and prodding you throughout the whole story. And it isn't a lot of like really good, juicy bits between you two where you're having these interactions where you feel like, if you're going to hunt me down, there has to be like a really cool reason for it. And you don't really get any of that stuff until, kind of later. And it's still fairly convoluted in the way that it winds up coming together towards the end of the story. And I was excited to see what the interplay was going to be between Cole and Juliana, because I was like, damn, two dope black protagonists, or two, the two faces of the game, are going to be in this space. And it just didn't really click in the way that I had hoped. There's one other element that we didn't get a chance to go into, and I think that is something that I'll have to maybe go back onto Spawn on Me and talk about in an upcoming podcast. We were told not to dig into the kind of PvP aspect of the game from the press, from PR. I don't know if that's because it's not necessarily up and running yet, because the game isn't live. I don't know if because, they've talked about things being attached to the multiplayer thing and they didn't want that stuff to maybe get spoiled. So there isn't any, in this review at least, any conversation for folks who are thinking and asking about the PvP part of it. It basically will play into the same way that you thought about the invasion parts of Juliana as an AI character coming into your world doing that kind of thing. In our preview, the conversation was about Juliana's basically kind of slowing you down from getting through the level. If she kills you, she gets a couple of perks or some cool stuff. If you kill her, you get some cosmetic stuff within the game. But we just didn't get a chance to check out any of that stuff live, and we'll be talking about that later once this is after embargo, once we're able to actually play it. And shoot me stuff in the comments, and I'll be talking about it once I get a chance to do it, or that information will come up on an upcoming episode of Spawn on Me. So make sure you're checking out all the stuff here on YouTube and on our Apple Podcasts and podcast services to be able to hear more about that stuff later. But in general, I think Deathloop is a pretty interesting experiment. I think it's a fun game. It doesn't hit the heights that I had hoped it would from anticipation perspective, but I do think it is an interesting and fun game that is using, again, this time loop conversation or time loop element to its gameplay that is the driving force for not only how you kind of interact with it, but how the game works against you, which I think is pretty brilliant. I think those parts they have nailed. I think the feeling and connectedness to a game like Dishonored is absolutely there. You can see the analogs there all over it. But from a story perspective, from a character perspective, I feel like it falls a little bit short. And that kind of leads it to not being as great as it potentially could have been. So Thank you so much for checking this out. We'll drop a little bit of gameplay right after this so you can check out a little bit more of Deathloop. We'll be doing more of these reviews in the upcoming days and months. Make sure you're subscribed, hit the button, hit the notifications here on YouTube, and check out the podcast for more information about this game and many, many others you can check out on all podcast platforms around the globe. We'll see you very, very soon. Take care. Be well. Peace.